Okay, everybody. So this is going to be extent of condition and extent of cause. They're two separate methods that we use um, during cause analysis or accident investigation to understand the breadth of a particular problem. So first, going into the recap or intro, I've gotten some questions about just kind of like if you guys are doing everything you're supposed to do, etc. Everybody's doing great. The only thing I would recommend is to, take a look at the Slack. If you haven't commented a lot over the last little bit, you know, get in there and, engage a little bit. But otherwise, everybody's been doing fine. Which leads me to um, the Slack conversation since we posted last week. Elise covered the human errors in her instance. Yeah, Elise, your situation is very interesting. It's like all human errors to me when I read it. So you definitely have an interesting place to start. And yeah, the Swiss cheese method or model is a great instance to kind of identify some of those things and to move forward with those. I posted this paper. This is kind of interesting in terms of how complex systems fail. It's an old paper, so when I read it, I don't think anything is not true, but it might give you an interesting starting point to some topics or concepts that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise seen, but it covers also a lot of different aspects of complex systems engineering, which is really interesting. Then Derek talking about the Titanic. Yeah, uh, you know, it's shocking anytime I think you go into history and realize that like kind of government regulations were really only a thing in the last 100 years, 150 years maybe. Um, so it's interesting, but yes, I one of the most famous instances, right, was of the Californian. I wonder if anything ever happened to the folks on the Californian, but because that's an interesting situation. Um, and yeah, nowadays a cruise liner turning off all communication, I would wonder if they can, like if it's even something that they can actually do. Um, yeah, you're supposed to have some lifeboats, but not necessarily everything. And yeah, I think the Titanic sinking, and I think you caught it. I mean, depending on your measure of cynicism, right? The large number of wealthy and famous people involved, probably drove a lot of that. But like you captured before, um, the majority of the deaths were in the lower cabin. So um, that's definitely a interesting consideration there. And Shane, okay, so you read it. Yes, so you talked in here about knowledge transfer is what you're kind of getting at here, especially well, one difference, I guess, that is more knowledge transfer. What you're talking about here is just that cultural, like calcification of things. But one thing you deal with in a lot of these type of organizations is eventually those people are going to leave. They're going to retire and move on or whatever. And then in general, if they didn't impart that knowledge to the new folks, you're going to have a bad time. Um, but it is interesting to kind of see the how things have worked for years. There's a famous quote, that the most dangerous phrase in business is we've always done it this way. Um, and you've experienced this in construction, law enforcement, and at the UI. So the cultural structure in those occupations was surprisingly similar. So what do you think that leads you to? Um, what I would say is it's probably not the occupations. It's just people. And that there just tends to be certain ways that these organizations work. It's actually interesting. There's a book. If anybody's interested, send me a Slack message and I'll find it so I can tell you exactly who wrote it. But I think it's called Orgs, ORGS. And it essentially talks about why you know, the stereotypical middle managers that don't really do anything, but why like middle management is a critical part of organizational structures. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, a lot of the organizational psychology in place in a lot of these things is interesting. Um, if you have more interest there, I would reach out to Dr. Thorstensen up in the psych department. He is an IO psychologist, so that's kind of in his wheelhouse. So going back here, I wanted to put this out there. So if you need anything, let me know. If you're stuck on something, if you're struggling, you need whatever, if you need an extension, again, we don't really have anything to do right now, but just keep in mind, you can always reach out to me. For this week, your post, just read that paper if you haven't, and make a post about your accident specifically. So Shane, you've already read through it, so just pick a few of them and see, especially where you picked, where, let's see, oh, I scrolled up way too far. Hold on here. All right. There it is. So with the, no, I missed it again. Sorry, Shane, I'm trying to find your post here. Yeah, so you were doing Chernobyl. That's what I thought, but I could not recall. So uh, you'll have a field day with Chernobyl. I mean, you're going to find lots of those, but apply it to your system. The Titanic one's going to be interesting to see, like, about the older situations, and I'm interested to see what you define as the complex system in your accident. We've got a good breadth of like technological accidents, human failures, poor regulations, corruption. We've got a lot of variety there. So read through that and see, and you can obviously talk to about your own personal experience too. Okay, so we're going into this week, this is the extent of analysis or evaluation steps. This is a star because it could be cause or condition. We'll go into what the difference is. And one thing, I don't know if you have all had this experience, but usually when I read through accidents and different instances, I kind of can't help but try to figure out, okay, what was broken here? And then, oh, is that broken anywhere else? That's a big focus of mine. So that's kind of the way I see these two, is how do you affect change and try to control the situation beyond the immediate incident. So we'll start with extent of condition. So the definition here is the extent to which the actual condition exists within other plant processes, equipment, and human performance. Different systems or fields may require EOCs, or that could be obviously extent of condition or cause, for specific accidents. So for example, in the nuclear field, depending on the situation and the particular incident and how it's graded, you may be required to do a root cause analysis or an apparent cause analysis, and those may require or not an extent of cause or condition. So the relevant area that you're in might determine that. And the example here is basically, hey, here's something bad caused or executed by Agent X. So we're going to assume here that there was a human factor. So, okay, the human did something, created this, unfortunate condition. Was Agent X doing this anywhere else? And that's really what you're looking at here. This is also one of my longtime favorite bad design pictures here. But same thing. What could this look like? Let's say hypothetically, from an extent of condition standpoint, someone comes across this and is like, why would you ever do this? Come to find out, let's say a master sprinkler plotting method was defined by the city or the community. And so every single park or public ground has this particular configuration of sprinklers, and they just never adapted that when there's an electrical box in front of it. That's just an example there. But that's kind of what we're talking about. The reason we do extended conditions is to answer, is there an immediate vulnerability to any other plant, processes, equipment, or operators? Obviously, plant, this is just my nuclear side, but this could be to any other, just exclude it, processes, equipment, or operators. It also serves to validate whether the condition was an isolated event or was broader in the application. And it forces you to consider the potential risk of the condition being more widespread than just your individual incident. So like when we went back to, if agent X made a mistake, if agent X is, let's say somebody is supposed to, their job is to design these labels. And so they figured, okay, well, I'll just design the background once and then just change the title, move on with my life. Well, you might have an extended condition here if you ever have to change that. And so the basics of extended condition, it can be started immediately and can run parallel to the accident investigation or the cause analysis. In some cases, especially if you have something super complex and you don't know the conditions yet, that are the causal factors that are at play, then you may want to hold off, but it can be, and frequently is, just because it's a time-consuming process. It'll also help you identify any areas of scope within your analysis that you need to expand in. This, like we said, it requires you to understand what the actual conditions are. Level of rigor should be proportionate to the problem severity. So you all picked, the famous accidents that are really bad. So the rigor level will be high, but in some instances, you may not dig in as deep. And this is from Jurassic Park. If this was your issue, this is a very severe one, when the raptors get free. This is a table or a tabular structure that we often use in extended condition. So you essentially will go through various other circumstances or characteristics at your plant or in your, in the airplanes or wherever you're working. You're looking for any of these things. So same and same, obviously that's going to have the same condition. Same to similar is something that you have the same object but a similar defect. That's something where, okay, you need to dig in a little bit more and see, okay, what is there an underlying conditions causing both defects? And then you would then follow that through. And then similar to same. So you have a similar valve design, but the same defect happened. And then similar to similar. And what this will do is it'll help you kind of organize priority. So in this could be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of priority. The likelihood of having a similar condition be at play in the same for same is higher than in a similar. They're all relevant, but it helps you kind of narrow down if you need. And then for extended condition, you could go on forever in an extended condition usually. So you need to define what your scope and your bounds are, where the condition exists, any particular vulnerabilities that you can spot, the more immediate, the more important they are to be fixed. In terms of more immediate, you notice them. You need to explain, what areas you're considering but ruling out and why. And then you might look into, safety culture weaknesses associated with the extended condition. We'll get into that a little bit with extended cause, but if you have a condition that is cultural or organizational, the extent of that will probably be the entire organization. Here's another great bad design. Oh, it's a cool ramp. It's a cool ramp. If you notice right here, it turns to stairs on the other side. So that's a great way to snap your leg. Now, extent of cause, slight difference. Instead of looking just for conditions, you're specifically looking for the root cause. This italicized section is the formal definition. Um, you have to have the root cause in hand before you can do an extent of cause. But keep in mind, you can also do them with other causes or causal factors. So if you have a parent cause, contributing causes, it may not always be worthwhile to do them because if you have an apparent or a contributing cause, you might not have enough of a foundation to that to then crosswalk across an organization. But it's still something to think about. And in general, it'll be something you'll probably notice anyway, but just keep that in mind. And that's I just talked about their scope, maybe an issue with lower level causes. When I talk about lower level causes, I mean anything that's not a root cause. So, the root cause is kind of the most constrained in that sense. And then the others, you're just getting more and more situations. But here's an example. Oh, come and find out this carpet manufacturer is getting sued by businesses because their carpet is making people fall downstairs. And there's a class action lawsuit of people who have fallen downstairs, and then the businesses have to deal with it. This would be an extent of cause of, okay, where else did we put this carpet? And was it anywhere like this where this could be a problem? That's an example there. And this is a pretty clear, I mean, if you're anything like me, you'll see a lot of overlap and like meshing between these two, because I don't think that the delineation is as firm as some people do. So extent of cause will be focused on correcting the causes of problems in order to prevent any future conditions from existing, where an extent of condition is you're assuming the conditions are already in existence or you find them in existence, but there has not been a result. So it's a preemptive versus preventative might be the way you'd want to think about it. An extent of cause is attempting to be a fully preventative action, where extent of conditions a little bit more preemptive. That might be a helpful way to draw the conclusion. But if you have a hard time picking one, don't stress over it. If you're doing a cause and you end up doing more of like an extended condition thing, like I said, there's no real hard and fast line between these, and causes and conditions will get muddy anyway. So the steps for an extent of cause evaluation, you'll do this also relatively similarly with an extent of condition. So your root and contributing causes are identified. You use the same similar table that we talked about, determine, what in terms of the object, what thing is wrong, and in what way is it wrong. Assess the tiers. This is that prioritization we talked about. And then you will brainstorm the causes, evaluate the risk. Keep in mind, we talked about risk is the likelihood of something occurring and the consequence together. And then, yeah, like everything, there will be a report. Now, some important tips. So level effort commensurate with the level of investigation and significance of event. You might cross all sorts of boundaries as you go through, which also might make you not super popular, but it's important to keep in mind. And you want to consider other procedures that may be susceptible to different problems due to the same causes. So as you're going through here, that's why I picked a search dog. You kind of follow the cause, the condition, wherever it leads. That's where you can kind of trace a weird path through an organization or through an timeline to try to find what's going on there. But that is the nature of the method. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. It's somewhat guided, some like in that kind of unintentional sense, but also can seem kind of random. Keep in mind, you only perform these after the root cause is fully understood. This is true with conditions too. Every root cause must be evaluated. So this is assuming, if your root cause analysis is requires an extent of cause. which, like I said, in the nuclear world, it does. But it's a good thing, even if it's a good idea, even if it's not necessarily required in your particular field or application space. The relationships are important. You have to have that clear problem statement to cause linkage. Otherwise, you might end up catching situations that don't apply, or bloating up your scope. And then obviously, this is true for conditions too, but your corrective action plans needs to cover that. Usually extended conditions will fall under an immediate or an interim corrective action plan because you need to fix them now. But in some instances, it'll still be there. So just keep it in mind. Otherwise, it looks weird when you do a whole bunch of work to build this fancy report and everything. And then at the end of it all, oh, we just didn't do anything to correct the problem. Here's some examples here that are kind of might be helpful to look through. So like, okay, a clearance tag. So this clearance tag is like a lock and tag out was hung on the wrong component. Why? Because the component wasn't labeled. Are there other clearance tags hanging on wrong components? What's the underlying cause? Poor labeling program. And then what's the extent of cause population? You've got a population of unlabeled components. So that's kind of how you can walk through these. And this might be a particularly helpful table to kind of go through with your instance. And then as you're looking into closing factors, oh, I see what I'm saying. Closing factors, so like in closing, see, so what happens when I'm doing these in a hurry, of extent evaluation. So extent of cause, extent of condition. Keep in mind, might be required in your process. It can be very time consuming, which may not have organizational buy-in. Either somebody doesn't want to pay you or fund you to do the work to, go down this rabbit hole for 4 months. The other thing is it's not a very popular process in two ways. One of them is this one. So Department X has an incident. Department B doesn't want to borrow the trouble from that. They might have those conditions or whatever, but they don't want to deal with, they don't want the spotlight on them. And also from an organizational perspective, right? Okay, an extent of cause or an extent of condition is kind of like showing your hand, showing your card. Okay, find what's wrong in our world and then tell us. That a lot of times organizations may not like that because then they have to do something about it when they may not want to. And then some assumptions are going to be made. So we talked about organizational and cultural. We would assume that an extent of condition or extent of cause that is related to one of those two, the extent population would be the entire organization or the entire area where the culture is present. And any shared aspect like that can have a huge population for that. So that's where we get into when you see, in media or whatever, huge organizational failures, Enron or whatever, you'll see some of these characteristics. And that's basically all for extent of cause or extent of condition. Coming up, we'll do interviewing. So these are kind of the things that I wanted you to kind of keep in mind as we go through interviewing processes. And actually, I might add this to the post you make. So go ahead and answer the question about how complex systems fail, but then also what's your experience with interviewing? Now, keep in mind, this could be you've hired people. This could be you've participated in accident investigations. It could be one thing that people don't really realize is a huge benefit in interviewing is if you ever worked in sales. The just overall sales process is very interviewing heavy. So yeah, just what's your experience with this? And, do you have any pearls of wisdom or things that you've learned through that? But the big points here, all the methods, tools, and processes that we have covered will fail. They will fail you if no one will talk to you. accident investigation, cause analysis, any of these things are reliant on the people supporting it, including we talked about organizations, management structures supporting it, also the folks involved. So if you consider the events that you've covered, and those final reports may not capture a lot of what was said about this and around it. So if you can find news stories that are around the time, that can be useful to see how people spoke of the incident publicly, and you know, then kind of extrapolate what about the people who weren't in the news. So these are the people that may have been involved in the incident or employees that don't talk to journalists and those things. Did they have a reason to worry about talking to an investigator? This is also what led to whistleblower laws. So what about them? And this is what we get into is in a cause analysis or an accident investigation, you're very likely not going to be in a position where you'll have the power to say, oh yeah, I'll make sure you don't get fired from this or from whatever you tell me. But you can present it that that's not your goal. That's not what you're here for. You're just here to figure out what happened and how to prevent it in the future. What anybody up the chain does with your information, um, you can't really be held accountable for, but it's definitely a fine line to walk. So there are some key tools in interviewing that we'll start covering, um, and just kind of see if you can find anything on your accidents about how the interviewing process happened. Maybe they commented on it in the report, or the news had some pieces of information there. But yeah, you might find some interesting characteristics there. Um, and otherwise, yeah, I'm excited to see your guys's posts. Keep commenting. I'm assuming most everybody in the class might have had a week like I did, and so because there wasn't as much activity on the Slack, that's okay. I understand that stuff happens, but try to catch up. Um, Otherwise, I think we're good, and I hope you guys have a good weekend. And sorry again for the delay.